The advancement of medicine and technology has brought with it great gains when it comes to human health, the combating of disease, and the treatment of physical ailments. The increased knowledge of how the human body works and the ability to bring technology to bear to analyze blood or body functions or do MRI imaging or X-ray picturing, laser and robotic surgery and organ transplants, as an example, have resulted in wonderful gains. These gains can be said to be blessings from God and the result of the applied gifts of the intellect and pursuit of truth, which are all given by God and encouraged by Him. However, the understanding that moral constraints are both necessary for practical reasons and demanded by God for moral reasons in every area of life, from engineering to medicine to politics and law to all of life and living, was once commonly accepted. It produced a professional restraint backed up by civil law and supported by moral truth as preached from the pulpits. But this set of principles have been discarded. With that, I welcome you to Stand in the Gap. I'm Sam Rohrer, and I'll be accompanied by Pastor Isaac Crocket. The devastating international impact of COVID panic policies has exposed a dangerous foundational change in law, science, education, medical research, healthcare, and policy standards. And advanced in dictatorial fashion, justified by declared emergency declarations issued by federal and state executive branches, executive orders have suspended all national and, in many respects, state law. And this action has abortively jettisoned established restraining law and medical standards when it comes to medical approvals and qualified biological research. And the unfolding revelations have shocked the world, revealing a Pandora's box with incredible implications to all of life. For instance, experimenting with growing human babies in Petri dishes and freely mixing animal and human DNA is now standard. Human experimentation on a global scale is now occurring with untested gene therapies despite international law without informed consent. So, should the safety and moral limitations imposed on human government following the evil Nazi experimentations on millions of humans subjects after the Nuremberg trials, should they still be observed today? Should questions be asked and made part of a robust modern debate? I would say unequivocally, yes. But this is not happening in the midst of this developing, brave new world where people have set aside God, knowledge, truth, law, and moral constraint. And in the midst of this sea change, secret and unlawful strategic experimentations and research are becoming known. Should it not alarm us all? Well, today in part one and next week in part two, I want to introduce this issue, provide some background, some examples of where we are, and then consider some implications of living in a moral-less world of medicine and research. And then we'll conclude with some foundational biblical and scientific reasons of why there must be biblical morality standards that define and limit what is referred to as bioethics. Our guest is Dr. Marilyn Singleton. She's a board-certified anesthesiologist and immediate past president of Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. She's both a medical doctor, possessing as well a law degree in constitutional and administrative law from UC Berkeley. She's been a frequent guest with me on our Stand in the Gap Today national radio program. And with that introduction, let me welcome right now to the program Dr. Marilyn Singleton. Marilyn, thank you for being with us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, and you are eminently qualified. And we've got a big task we're undertaking here in these two brief programs, but I think we can do it. Let me just, to get things going here, ask you from an overall perspective, as a doctor, as an attorney, why is it important to have a defined set of moral principles to guide us in the area of medicine and research?
We have to make sure that anything we do, any norms, always promote the goals of the research. And the goals have to be truth, knowledge, and accuracy, and making sure that no data is ever fabricated. Without those, the researchers can't trust one another. we can't trust the research. And unless you have the trust of the populace, you might as well not be doing the research at all. And this is really what we're running into now. And we have to hold the researchers accountable. We have to have the transparency of their conflicts of interest. Otherwise, we can't adhere to basic human rights. So honesty, no bias, integrity, openness, and confidentiality, and always protect the individual human rights.
Marilyn, you laid that out extraordinarily well. And ladies and gentlemen, just for the sake of defining a term, I'm going to give a term right here. When we say bioethics, the definition of ethics, just so we get it established here, is a set of moral principles specifically relating to or affirming a specified group or field or form of conduct. And that's exactly what Dr. Singleton just described. And when I work in bioethics, we're just saying that standard is now the standards of medical and biological research. That's bioethics. That's where we're going to go today. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution. Educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap. And as we talk about this subject today of bioethics, or unfortunately redefining bioethics, we're talking with our friend who's been on the radio program, Stand in the Gap today, but is with us today on Stand in the Gap, Dr. Marilyn Singleton. And as Sam already said, you're eminently qualified for us to pester you with all of our questions today, because not only are you a medical doctor and have excelled in that field, but you also have a degree as an attorney. And so, unfortunately, ethics, moral ethics with bioethics involved here, it does become a legal kind of chaotic stuff going on now too. And so I want to ask you, as you look over just the past few years, by that I guess we could say the last decade to 2 decades, and especially the last year since COVID policies have been instated, what are you seeing that disturbs you when it comes to bioethics? And are we seeing maybe things come out in the last few years that have just would have surprised the medical world prior to this?
I think just looking overall, and when you say the last 10 years, that's where we have science advancing so fast and people not even paying attention sometimes to what the ethical concerns are. And then once we have that advancement, how can people live without it? And nobody thinks, how did we get there? What did we do to get there? And then recently with COVID, the government dictates really have bordered on tyrannical, and they have not been good for our health. We look at the lockdowns, the use of masks with no scientific basis. And the whole point, as we discussed, is you have to have your research fit the aims of accuracy and doing something to actually help society. Those things did not. They were harmful. We had the censoring of doctors talking about drugs that were helpful to patients. And why? It appears to promote vaccines for profit. There's nothing wrong with vaccines per se, but we do not use drugs merely for profit.
And that brings that kind of opens up a whole Pandora's box when you start looking at what is the contributing factor to something. Is it the health of the patient, or is it the bank account of the company behind it? And so you've already brought up right from the very beginning that we need accountability, we need transparency. So all of that plays into effect when we talk about bioethics. And you said there's got to be truth. And that's just a common sense, what used to be common sense, which isn't common anymore, biblical worldview, is you have to start with what is true. And then work through it, knowledge and accuracy and those things that you talked about. I guess kind of going to your legal perspective now, you've been trained at UC Berkeley and you have this background with constitutional law. Why do you think that it's necessary that for there to be truth, when we're talking about this overall bioethics category here, for us to find truth in that, why do you think that it's necessary that there has to be some sort of common morality that is agreed to across the board?
Well, the morality has to precede the law. It has to be the basis of the law. And otherwise, the law won't be successful. We know that some people obey the law just so they won't get caught, which is great. That's one reason to have the law. So even if you have no morals, you just don't want to go to jail. There's other people who amazingly need no law, that they always act with morality. But we have to remember that the law and morality are not identical. Look at some of the laws. The laws change with the lawmakers. There was a time when slavery was legal. There was a time when we interned completely innocent people. Wife beating was legal. And we could certainly go on with many other things. Those are kind of ones we can think of. And also, different groups have different moral standards. What might be legal for the everyday guy wouldn't be legal for a physician or someone who's in some sort of financial fiduciary position. So we have to remember that. So we have to have morality in order to have true justice.
And boy, we could go down that road. Morality precedes the law, and morality determines the law. Not everybody has the same view, which is what you're saying, but without it, you have disorder. And so we'll just let that set right there, Marilyn. Let me come back and you ask this. We were talking earlier, and I think you may have said in an earlier radio program, you said this, quote, "We're actually in a time when science has moved ahead of moral principles." So just as law cannot move ahead of moral principles, neither should medicine or experimentation, and yet you say it has. So for right now, as we get into this illustrations, in next program, we're going to talk about really grave examples of where the medicine really has moved ahead of morality and big issues. But I want you to share with us some cutting-edge technology, for example, and where common practices are used, for instance, where morally legitimate and bioethically consistent practices are used, because we are not saying that technology is inherently immoral. So give me some examples of things where we've been cutting edge and not a violation of morality or bioethics standards.
Well, let's just start with our good old-fashioned basic drug research. But the key is when we do that drug research, there is informed consent. And it's very clear who the subjects are, so we don't have mistakes like only testing on men and then women use the drugs and have a problem, which has happened in the past. And the NIH has changed those rules, thank goodness. We have organ transplants, which is something that would have been unheard of years ago. And now they're routine and done quite safely and have a high degree of success. We have comfort care, a standard of hospice, where you're taking care of people who are near death, as long as we make sure we do nothing to hasten that death, but to truly make people comfortable. And amazingly, we have fetal surgery, where you can actually go in, operate on a fetus, and repair various neural defects so the baby will not be paralyzed when born. So there are some amazing things out there, but we just have to watch ourselves.
And I want to go there and just take that a step further. Most people would say, clearly, surgery is not one of those things that's a bad thing, that's a good thing. Excuse me. And the fact that you can actually take surgery into the uterus, into the baby in the womb and do surgery, it's kind of like, wow, what a fantastic thing that is. But that doesn't raise much of an issue of itself. That's something that makes sense. But when you get into organ transplants, now that may raise an issue because we are using some cases, and I want you to speak to this, where valves from pigs, as example, they're being used. And so I want you to take and share an example or two, or where animal involvements have been done in relationship to the human body, but in your opinion, I think according to truth standards, would not pose a violation of moral standards or any pre-existing bioethic standards.
Okay, something that had been used for years was cow arteries and veins, used when people had grafts because they had an aortic aneurysm or some sort of vascular disease, that you take the blood vessel from the cow, and this is a cow that's already dead. The blood vessel is prepared, sterilized, etc., and sewn into the human body because that caused less reaction than using what they used to use, Dacron, which is a synthetic substance. So that really improved vascular surgery and many lives were saved, but it was tissue of a dead animal. No genetic material was incorporated into the human body. As you mentioned, pig valves used instead of artificial material valves that, again, they tended not to have as many blood clots and have the body reject it. So save lives without changing any genetic material. So the important thing is looking at, does this change the humanness, or are we just using a piece of tissue that could have just as easily been a piece of nylon, piece of Dacron, but instead it was tissue that was harvested from an animal that was already dead?
All right, let me ask you another question in that regard. You probably, if you think of another example, go ahead and share. I think on the radio program, you talked about growing something on a pig skin or something of that type. You may want to talk about that. But within that context, medicine in the past and research in the past that brought forth these examples, where you reach into the animal world, and we'll talk about more of that in the next program of examples being done that are really a problematic aspect. But in this case, you've been in medicine a long time. Did the decision collectively to take a cow valve, artery, or a pig valve as an example, and put that into the human body, did that raise a question at the time when that was happening that you can recall? Was there a kind of like a general medicine-wide response where people got involved and said, well, all right, we're doing something really different here. Is this okay or not okay? Or was it just, did it raise no question at that point because it wasn't beginning to mix DNA and that kind of thing, as you talked about?
Interestingly, it's funny, at the time that was used, I'm trying to think back, that we didn't even really talk about DNA that much. That's how far things have advanced. When I was in medical school, we talked about DNA, but the idea of how now kids in high school are learning some of the things that we were learning in medical school about DNA. So it wasn't something on our minds, really. It was way out there, and oh yeah, it was discovered, but it wasn't something in day-to-day use. And frankly, I can't remember a discussion other than just sort of quipping about it. Will we turn into a cow or will we turn into a pig? And there were religious discussions about using a pig valve in someone of the Jewish faith. who don't eat pork. And so these things came up. And so it did raise religious issues with individual patients, and certainly made doctors aware that you just can't treat all patients the same, bringing us back to the idea we all have to be treated as individuals. And that's part of our job as physicians, not to forget that patients are individuals and not cattle.
Excellent. Dr. Marilyn Singleton, we're going to go into a break here right now. I think what you established there is very significant. It ties together a statement you made at the beginning of the program, where you said, I believe, in the last 10 years, there have been quantum strides made in research and development that brings to us right now questions that are and do need to be considered that were not an issue 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll move into some of this when we come back in just a moment.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV, positively different television.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap. And as we kind of wrap this program up, I do want to remind you that this is part one. And so next week we're going to have Dr. Singleton on for part two. And but as we wrap this up, Dr. Singleton, as we've been looking at the implications of medicine without morality, it's a pretty big, pretty significant topic. Probably the biggest historical of recent, last 100 and so years of looking at this would be the Nazi regime. My grandfather went through the Holocaust. He was in the underground resistance movement in the Netherlands, the Dutch underground, and we know that they operated seemingly without moral constraints in a lot of ways. A lot of the things they did, the Nuremberg trials and so forth, brought forth different prosecution of these things. I guess to go to you from a legal standpoint as well as medical, what did the world learn from looking at the medical experimentation that they did without morality tied to it? What did the world learn, and maybe what should we be learning right now with what we're going through today?
Plain and simple is how easy it was for people to lose their humanity, how easy it was for people to fall prey to authoritarianism and follow the rules no matter what your heart said. And this is what's so sad, is how to realize how we can fall prey to not following what we know in our heart is right. And the first principle of the Nuremberg Code that followed all these awful, awful, hideous things that happened was nothing should ever be performed on a person without fully informed consent. And this is where we're going now, where we're starting to let that slip and slide a little, and we have to remember those lessons.
Dr. Singleton, there are a number of things I could say in summary, but a couple things that really stood out to me that you have stated, to which we would agree. Morality precedes the law. Law is what establishes policies and standards and guidelines. You did not say it, but I will say it. Law, having myself been in a position of making law in the General Assembly in Pennsylvania, always said law always has underneath of it some morality. It's not a question of if, it is who or what. And how quickly it is, you said, for people to lose their humanity, their connection to God, and then when that happens, to fall prey to tyranny. Great statements. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching us today. This is, again, part one of our program we're entitling the Redefining of Bio-Ethics, the Implications of Medicine Without Morality. Next week's program, we're going to get into some examples of where now morality has been left behind by medicine and research. Some of this may shock you, but you need to know, and we need to be evaluated today. And of course, we present all of our information from the perspective we call of a biblical worldview. The Scripture speaks to all issues of life, certainly what we're talking about today, and we're wanting to put some of those before you. Thanks for watching us. Let us know that you enjoy this program.